I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our guest speaker today, the Honourable Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, Member of Parliament for Beaches, East York, hereafter referred to as Nate. Since first being elected in 2015, Nate has become known as one of the most independent and principled voices in the House of Commons. For those of us gathered here in the spirit of justice and peace, his recent work in Ottawa is of particular significance. In 2024, he supported vote number 658, an NDP motion calling for a ceasefire, ending of arms exports to Israel, continued funding for UNRWA, sanctions on extremist settlers, support of the International Criminal Court, and other items supporting the rights of the Palestinian people. In May of 2025, he seconded a motion of Heather McPherson's calling on the Government of Canada to recognize the State of Israel, State of Palestine. He has been clear and consistent in stating that Canadian foreign policy must be anchored in international law. From the beginning, Nate has been a maverick. The CBC, in an analysis in 2016, identified him as the least predictable Liberal MP, noting that he had already cast 11 dissenting votes in the first 6 months of the 42nd Parliament. More recently, and perhaps more tellingly, in June of 2025, in a rare and significant break from caucus discipline, he was the only Liberal MP to vote against the Liberal government's closure motion on Bill C-5. He joins us today as a representative who understands that a truly just peace requires an end to the decades-long occupation and a courageous commitment to human rights for all. And as a sort of a last-minute addendum to these opening remarks and introduction, I can't resist commenting on the fact that in 2023, he only very narrowly lost the Ontario Liberal leadership to Bonnie Crombie. And with her resignation, they're going to be looking for a new leader who knows what the future holds. Please join me in welcoming Nathaniel Erskine-Smith.
Well, thank you for hosting me. Thank you for the kind words, and more than anything, thank you for braving the weather. I was invited to discuss human rights and Canada's role in a just peace for Israel and Palestine, though to start, I want to speak to the tragedy unfolding closer to home. In Minnesota, we are witnessing the brutality of fascism in real time. Masked agents encouraged to enlist to defend homeland and culture are killing American citizens in the street with no justification or excuse and with no legal consequence. The administration defends the indefensible, telling us to ignore our eyes and ears. It's horrifying to watch the video evidence of this brutality, and it is horrifying to watch our neighboring democracy lose itself. Over the last year, we've seen abuse and threats leveled against Canada and other democratic allies abroad. And now we see America trampling on its own democracy and rule of law at home, acting inconsistently with its own foundational values. For a Republican Party that has traditionally prided itself as grounded in a faith-based political morality, it has so badly lost its way. Now, I am not a religious person. The few times I found myself in a beautiful church like this was as a kid, and I was tagging along with my good friend Tim. Some of you will know his mom, Nora. Some of you will also know my mom. She's here today, Sarah. And while ours was not a religious household, it was a household where right and wrong mattered, where values mattered, and where our treatment of others mattered. Now, in Parliament over the last decade, I've had the good fortune to work alongside faith-based advocates on ending poverty, advancing climate action and reconciliation, and defending human rights. Shared values make for common cause. Now, in preparing for this morning, I was asked by members of the church what scripture I'd be relying on. Now, scripture I'm not overly familiar with, but certain passages do communicate the shared values that I want to emphasize this morning. Micah 6:8 says, "And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. Isaiah 1:17 says, "Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow." Or as Proverbs 31 puts it, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. For the rights of all who are destitute, speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." These are all verses that speak to universal truths about how we should treat others and the aims we should pursue with our lives. Treat others with dignity and seek justice. If you'll bear with me, allow me to read two more passages. Recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Now, that is a different text. That is the preamble in Article 1 to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, an enduring document of 30 articles in total that offers a foundation of rights and the realization of one's full potential. Everyone deserves inherent dignity and inalienable rights. It is both a self-evident truth and a moral pursuit because that truth is so often unrealized. Interestingly, the preliminary draft of that document was written by a Canadian, John Peters Humphrey. It's a fact we should celebrate as Canadians, an example of moral leadership on the world stage, an idea that many of us take to heart, believing it's not only the right thing to do, but also part of who we are, part of our history. We should celebrate that history without rewriting it, though. When it came to the adoption of that Universal Declaration, Canada was one of only 8 states to abstain. In a speech to mark the Declaration's 20th anniversary, Humphrey described embarrassment by Canada's decision to abstain and his continued disappointment with the government's lack of commitment to international human rights. One could well imagine him giving a similar speech today. We are reducing foreign aid overall today. And while we've made important commitments, yes, to the reconstruction of Gaza, certainly to Ukraine, too often those vocal commitments are not matched by real substance. Now, in fairness, it can feel like chaos in today's world, with little semblance of any international rules. A UN rapporteur warns that the Iranian regime may have killed more than 20,000 civilians in its criminal crackdown on protesters. The UN Human Rights Chief says Sudan's civil war has put people through horror and hell. It's a genocide of systematic killings, sexual violence, and ethnic cleansing. Russia's illegal and brutal attack on Ukraine is going on 4 years now, with hundreds of thousands of casualties. And then there's Israel's indiscriminate destruction of Gaza and the dehumanization of the Palestinian people. Last summer, Israeli human rights organizations BT Salem and Physicians for Human Rights Israel concluded that the mass killing, decimation of basic infrastructure, forcible displacement on a huge scale, and official policies and statements led to the unequivocal conclusion that Israel is taking coordinated, deliberate action to destroy Palestinian society in the Gaza Strip. In other words, Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. In August, I wrote to Minister Anand to emphasize the need for action. I wrote that the world watched the heinous October 7th Hamas terrorist attack on innocent Israeli civilians in horror. And ever since, we've watched Israel's mass and indiscriminate killing of innocent Palestinian civilians, forced displacement, intentional starvation, and wholesale destruction of health, educational, religious, and cultural facilities, all while Israeli leaders dehumanize the Palestinian people. I emphasized that Canada cannot be complicit in Israel's crimes and that we must proactively advance peace in every possible way. Yes, we should recognize important steps taken towards an arms embargo by the government, but we should call for more complete and transparent action. We should commend the symbolic recognition of a Palestinian state, but also call for multilateral cooperation to establish a peacekeeping presence that would facilitate the distribution of critical humanitarian aid, secure an overdue ceasefire and release of hostages, and ensure peace and security for any future free and fair elections. So much in realpolitik, of course, but unfortunately it depends on the United States here. As Prime Minister Carney put it recently, we knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false. that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, and that international law applies with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. In a brazen reinforcement of this reality, we've watched the United States sanction prosecutors and judges at the International Criminal Court. Why? For applying the law, including for issuing an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. Now, given that reality of international law, it was always the case that a ceasefire depended on the U.S. acting or a strong enough coalition of like-minded middle powers asserting a more forceful role. A ceasefire was realized in October, but because the United States finally acted. But in the interest of truth-telling, let's not misstate the reality here either. The United Nations Office for Project Services tells us that critical lifelines have remained closed and that people continue to be killed day in and day out. There have been countless ceasefire violations, hundreds killed, and I received this email earlier this week from an UNRWA representative. I regret to report that yesterday, this was January 20th, Israeli forces stormed UNRWA's headquarters and began demolishing our facilities. Recall that this complex has been used by the agency since the 1967 war. Underscoring the political nature of this illegal action, Israeli Minister Ben-Gvir and MK Yulian Malinowski were present at the demolition, arguing over which of them should get the credit for this unprecedented attack against the UN agency. Jerusalem's deputy mayor made matters worse, saying, "With God's help, we will destroy, we will eliminate, and annihilate all UNRWA personnel." UN Security Council Resolution 2803 offers a very, very imperfect path towards a more enduring peace. Positively, it guarantees the freeing of remaining hostages and called for the entry of distribution and aid in the Gaza Strip to proceed without interference. Hamas is to have no future in the governance of Gaza, and the IDF is to withdraw completely as a multilateral international stabilization force overseas security. But let me read you a few headlines and let's consider what the prospects are for an enduring peace that respects the self-determination and safety of both Palestinians and Israelis. These just for the last 24 to 48 hours. Israeli drone strike kills 2 children collecting firewood in Gaza. Cold and malnutrition claim more victims in Gaza amid winter rains. 3 journalists killed in an Israeli airstrike on Kar in central Gaza, health officials say. Trump unveils his vision to rebuild Gaza into a seaside metropolis. Yes, this so-called Board of Peace is a grotesque absurdity. Participation is based on those who curry favor with Trump or outright buy their way in. So Putin is welcome. Carney, not so much. Netanyahu is welcome. Any Palestinian representative, not so much. As Donald Trump, the self-appointed chair of the board for life, put it, once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do. Now, Canada needs to pursue 2 actions. At home, it's the same action as ever. At home, it's being crystal clear that criticism of Israel's actions in Gaza is not anti-Semitism, and to respect and protect free expression. At the same time, as we ensure that when voices do intimidate, when voices do harass, when voices do engage in anti-Semitism and other hate, there are consequences for those actions. We need to make sure we respect and protect rights here at home, free expression, and security. Abroad, Canada will need to work with other like-minded countries, engaging directly with the Gaza Executive Committee, and work to restrain the worst excesses of the real estate baron's dream, and perhaps to ensure that the stabilization force functions effectively. We'll see where that goes. Now, Carney spoke recently of a rupture. The multilateral institutions on which middle powers have relied, he says, the WTO, the UN, the COP, the very architecture of collective problem solving are under threat. What does it mean for middle powers to live the truth, he asked. It means naming reality. Stop invoking rules-based international order as if it still functions as advertised. It means acting consistently, applying the same standards to allies and to rivals. And it means building what we claim to believe in rather than waiting for the old order to be restored. It means creating institutions and agreements that function as described. The absurdity that is the Board of Peace exists because of a failure of existing institutions. But these institutions still matter. A friend of mine, David Adler, he's one of the organizers of the Pan American Congress, a collection of progressive politicians across the Americas that meet once a year. He was also on the global Samud flotilla, and he wrote in the wake of U.S. actions in Venezuela, "We may never have had international law, but you will miss it when it's gone." Or consider the words of John Peters Humphrey, who said, "Surely a world that can achieve the atomic bomb but fail in the creation of the United Nations is morally bankrupt. And this moral bankruptcy is the reason for our failure to organize peace." Now, the answer to Carney's challenge, to Adler's, to Humphrey's, is to rebuild international institutions that function in keeping with our values, that act justly, love mercy, walk humbly, that embody our shared values, not only in name, but in practice, applied consistently, that carry the ability to not only recognize everyone's inherent dignity and inalienable rights, but the ability to ensure they are realized. Now, the Canadian government should lead the way, and it did so once upon a time in the creation of NATO. Clause 2, the Canadian clause, was a testament to Pearson's leadership. But Canadians can act too, even without their government. We know this, again, because of the story of John Peters Humphrey, who, even despite the Canadian government abstaining on the creation of that Universal Declaration of Human Rights, he helped to lead the way. Thanks very much for your time.